cover the topic of buying versus building compliance automation tooling. This is a decision that every organization faces as GRC and security teams look to scale their programs, and one that comes with a lot of nuance. You can build internally or invest in third-party tools, and both have their benefits, but they also come with some real trade-offs that we will get into today. But before we get started, I wanted to give a quick thank you to our guest moderator, Alan Luk. We're really excited to have him leading this session. Alan brings a ton of experience across GRC and compliance, and he joined us for the first time back in February to lead our session on making cyber risk board ready, which was one of our favorite conversations to date. So we're really happy to have him back for this one. We're also very excited to be joined by a really incredible group of panelists, DeNardo, Pierre-Paul Ferland, and Ayoub Fandi, who each bring really strong experience on this topic. And Alan will let them introduce themselves in a bit and share more about their backgrounds. But for anybody joining us live, feel free to drop your name or LinkedIn in the chat. We encourage everyone to connect with each other as well as Alan and our panelists. We also encourage questions throughout the session, and we'll make sure to cover them towards the end. But with that, I'll hand it over to Alan to kick us off.
Thank you, Grace. Hey, everybody, I'm Alan Luk. I'll be playing moderator once again, and it's becoming a favorite role of mine. I just get to ask these guys questions, right, and then listen to them talk about their experiences. So I feel very honored and privileged to be able to do that again. Today's topic is about build versus buy GRC tooling. So a lot of GRC teams right today are under pressure. Automate faster, scale across frameworks, stay audit ready, do more with less, right? So one of the most strategic decisions leaders need to make is like, do we buy something, out of the box and kind of make it work, or do we build something if for whatever reason buying doesn't work well, right? So here with three fantastic gentlemen that have a wealth of experience. They're going to talk about their own experiences about doing one or the other, or maybe both, in a hybrid scenario. And talking about the real pros and cons, what are the real trade-offs, cost, audit, defensibility, scalability, integration, debt, long-term ownership, those kinds of things. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Panelists, why don't each of you introduce yourself briefly, kind of share whether where you're working and whether your organization or organizations in the past have currently leaned towards buying versus building, or a hybrid approach for compliance automation. Why don't we go with Jeff, and then Pierre-Paul, and then Ayoub.
Perfect. Yeah. Greetings, everybody. Good afternoon, morning, evening. We're going to definitely give Ayoub a little bit of credit because it's 8 p.m. where he's at now. So if he starts fading away a little bit, we'll make sure we bring him back in. But as you can see, Jeff DeNardo, I'm the director of GRC at the Hershey Company. And we've typically leaned much more towards the buy side of things. Part of that is because we don't have the biggest development shop at Hershey currently. We're working on kind of expanding that a little bit more, but my view and my leadership's view has always tended to be, when it comes to some of the GRC stuff, it's not really rocket science, right? So these companies have built these tools, they've gone through the trials and tribulations of them, so they've typically just leaned on, let's buy something out of the box, let's bring it in, and from my viewpoint, it gets you a little bit, and we'll dive deeper into this as we move on, but a little bit quicker times of value. So that's typically where we've leaned towards.
Thank you, Jeff. Pierre-Paul, go for it.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Pierre-Paul. You can call me Pepe. I'm the GRC manager at Coveo, which is Canada's largest AI company. And our story is interesting because Coveo has been maintaining a SOC 2 attestation for over 10 years now. In fact, 2014 makes it 12 years. And at the time when they got through the SOC 2, which was pretty much a novel thing, in that area, it was Salesforce that asked Coveo to do it. And if there had been a Venta or a similar compliance automation platform, I'm pretty sure the CTO would have chosen that route. However, at the time, there was no such thing. So they went with a build approach by default almost. And when I inherited the SOC 2 in 2019, starting 2019, we had that weird hybrid build and spreadsheets approach. And I kind of maintained that for a while until I got so fed up with the whole thing that we moved to a more buy approach in 2024. And yeah, I guess I'm the build person, the buy person here.
All right. Thank you, Pepe. Ayoub.
Yeah, hello everyone. Ayoub, so currently the GRC automation lead or GRC engineering lead at GitLab. So we just went down the build path internally. So I manage software engineers, which makes it a bit easier, right, to go down the build path. We also built 4 tools in a bit less than 4 years during that time. In previous experiences, Salesforce, it was both. It's a bit complex story for people who know the internals of the Salesforce GRC team. And I worked at a startup where I did the kind of more build side, where it was like, Jira with spreadsheets and custom workflows. So I don't want to say I'm the build side. I can play any side. I can play the build side. If everyone else is on the buy, that's fine. But yeah, I think it's a spectrum, and I'm really interested to kind of hash things out and discuss it with the other folks.
Awesome. Well, I'm not a panelist, so nobody really cares about my opinion, but I work at Microsoft, so obviously we build everything, right? We don't buy anything. Our ego is too big. We're a software company, right? So I'm also on team build. All right, first question for you all. First question, and we'll go in the same order. Jeff, Pepe, and Ayoub. So where were you at? Like, what stage was your compliance program in when you said, hey, you know what? We need a compliance automation tool, right? We either buy it or build it. Like, at what point where you're like, enough is enough? Like, this is just too clunky, too manual. We need something. And the follow-up question to that is like, what were the main problems, right? What were the main scenarios and problems, that having a tool would solve?
Yeah, I think over at Hershey, one of our realizations, I think every GRC team gets to this point where everybody thinks they can manage everything via Excel spreadsheets and collecting evidence for audits and different things like that. And I think you come to the realization very, very fast that one audit cycle of collecting evidence, managing things to Excel spreadsheets, that you need some sort of tool. And we did that. We realized our SOX audit was a little bit of a mess. So that was our primary solve when we first brought in a tool. Was we weren't, and that's the recommendation that I'll give to anybody as they start down this path is, one, don't try to boil the ocean. Pick a very small use case, something that you can solve quickly and show that return on investment when you're buying some of these tools, because they can be pretty expensive when you buy them up front. So we picked our SOX audit, something that happens every single year. And we just said, let's bring in a tool, let's automate the IT controls, a very small subset of controls, a very controlled environment, and let's show leadership how much value this can bring from a time savings on individuals who need to upload the evidence, a time saving on the controllership team for being able not to have to manage the Excel sheets and everything. So that's the path that we took. We automated our SOX controls. It instantly showed value. And then what happened from that is it enabled more investment to start scaling on our program. So we started small, we showed the investment, and then from there we slowly started to grow. And where we're at now is we're looking to start enabling some more capabilities around continuous controls monitoring, to continuously monitor controls in real time. And we're taking the same approach where we're starting small. We're starting with our controls that we own within information security, show the return, and then we're going to start to kind of expand that from there. So, like I said, it was very much the Excel spreadsheets did us in, but picking something small and growing it really, really helps.
Got it, Jeff. One follow-up question for you, since I like to get into the details and examples. You're a director of GRC. You threw in kind of security team in there as well. Who are the main users and or contributors to the GRC team, that you or the GRC tool that you end up going with? Is it mainly like the GRC show? It's kind of like doing all these things inside the tool and making it nice and pretty for audits and auditors, or is it, you mentioned continuous assurance and continuous monitoring too. So that tells me like there's got to be some control owners or domain teams that are also finding benefits from using the tool. Right? Yeah,
absolutely. One, it was the initial lift was definitely a relief for my team, the GRC team, right? Because they didn't have to manage the JD comments V12 in this Excel spreadsheet. Everybody who's done it knows that that's what they can get to. But it was definitely help for the control owners as well, because the automation enables the control owners to get emails of when things are coming due, reminders that things are getting closer due, right? Where that time, all that responsibility falls on the GRC teams, but it took that relief off of us, but it also just said, hey, I can pop in real quick, I can grab a screenshot, upload it to the tool, and I can just be done with it. I don't have to worry about following up to make sure the auditors got it or anything like that. They just knew they could upload it and be done. And also for IT's leadership, it was also nice because they could run the report and see everything that was past due, everything that was completed. So it was a much more win-win for everybody, as opposed to just being a GRC only relief. So it helped out a lot.
Got it. And you're still on the same original tool that you guys purchased?
Well, we are, yeah. We're having some work, and this is one of the talking points for a little bit later that we can dive into. We're getting some growing pains for sure. We still have that same tool in place today, and we'll get to that one later. It's a conversation potentially for a different day if you let me rant for a while. So.
Well, we might get to it later today in the session. So, but yeah, we'll stop here. All right, go for it, Pepe.
Well, I mean, I could almost copy paste everything Jeff just said into my story. It's pretty much a similar one. For us, there were, I would say, two forces at play. So the first one was ISO. So Coveo got ISO 27001 certified in 2023. And by then, the intention was pretty much, let's build upon that. Let's get one certification per year. And my position was, okay, but we need to build a certification machine where we could get like all those ISO extensions really fast in a scalable way. And I had been through the ISO audit preparation with spreadsheets, with mappings done by hand. And 2023, like, so the prep work was done in 2022. At the time, like, there were no Cloud Opus 4.6 to help us out. So a lot of it was manual still. And so that was the first force. And the second force was to be able to run with a lean, small team. We wanted a small GRC team that was highly efficient. And we thought that having a platform would help with the team's efficiency, knowledge gathering, stop doing repetitive work. And this is how we pretty much summed it up. It really helped because our platform, like Jeff mentioned, had an integration with our external auditor. So, you know, I can put a screenshot in there, and now we've got fancy AI that actually does recognition of the screenshot, describing the screenshot on the platform. You hit ready for audit, and it goes to the auditor. So this really saves time of like a very big grunt work. And the second area was that our tooling, the automation tooling we had, was so complicated to run. Like, you needed to boot a Docker in a deployment environment, impersonate an IAM role, and then half the time it wouldn't work because you had to update 13 dependencies. And I was just so fed up with that, and I was like, no, I'm not training my team doing that. It's way too inside baseball.
Got it. Similar question for you, Pepe. Users and contributors, you know, beneficiaries of the tool, primarily for kind of audit scenarios with the GRC team, or kind of other teams benefiting from, you know, the insights and the data that the tool is collecting and spitting back out?
Yeah, so this is where I might differ a little bit with Jeff, in that on my side, what I wanted was to not force a supplemental UI on top of developers' teams. And so for me, the platform is more about the GRC team's internal routine, if you will, instead of being something that would bring the whole company together in compliance, which is totally acceptable to me. Like, it's a great way to have a strategy. Let's have everybody work in the same tool, have the same type of visibility on risks and on policies. That's great. However, what we picked was let's keep the people working where they want to work and have the platform just get the information from there. And it's a choice. Maybe I'll change my mind, but right now this is what I've preferred.
What works? Awesome. Ayoub?
Yeah, for me, so depending on experience, we sliced it a couple of different ways. I would say, like, especially at GitLab, what's challenging for us is, as we're cycling through different commercial solutions, you know, when you work at a company, Alan, you work at Microsoft, it's probably similar. And I think Pierre-Paul at Coveo is similar. Like you have to dogfood your own platform for as many things as possible. And you ended up with a lot of companies that have connectors for your tool, but the connector is extremely shallow compared to what you need to actually run with the tool in practice. And what we have, for example, internally is we use GitLab for project management, where most teams would use Jira or Trello or Asana or different platform. And most of the platforms, what they cared about on the automation side is they check for merge requests and approvals and basic stuff in the CI. So when we were down the buy route, you would still have to literally build from scratch the connectors you needed, because for a lot of the activities, the single source of truth was inside a GitLab issue or a GitLab project. And that was what was challenging, because in many cases, won't name any names, of course, but we had to like enforce in the contract, you help us build a custom connector by this date, and then whatever happens, that person gets laid off, change in the terms. So then a lot of what we would depend on for the connectors, it was a lot more depth than breadth. We only cared about 3 or 4, but we cared about maybe 3 levels down compared to the average customer. And our GRC team is fairly big, 20 ICs, which is huge compared to standards, which means our use cases are a lot more in depth. The way we're testing might differ between ICs, which meant that very often we just jump on a call and like half the team was like, there's no way it works. And one other thing I would say is, I think it changed a bit now, but up until recently, automation platforms, they cater to smaller teams, leaner teams, or non-GRC core buyers, which meant that for us, we couldn't get the automation we needed from traditional buy, but we couldn't get the depth we needed from automation buys. So that's kind of like the 2 layers where we ended up being like, at some point, we need something that is both in depth and very flexible. And if we have the resources, etc., then we're like, okay, maybe we'll just try this thing and try to build it.
Got it. For those of you who don't know, Ayoub leads a GRC Engineering newsletter, and it's very timely. The last couple of weeks, newsletters have been about build versus buy and kind of GRC engineering in general. Ayoub, you mentioned GitLab went through a few tools right before ending up for the decision to build. So were you just kind of searching for a tool that could have the depth that you had wanted, and then ultimately none of them kind of worked out well enough?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is our team is kind of like strong early adopters, which I think means we often onboarded. So for example, we onboarded platforms who other people in this group currently use, right? But we onboarded them way too early, I think. And often, I would say in 2 out of 4 cases, we were the biggest customer in terms of size and complexity of that vendor at that time, which meant onboarding was extremely tough. Kind of a hidden secret of GRC automation platforms is a lot of the onboarding and migration goes through spreadsheet process. There's not like kind of one-click wizard, and the approach that is like more refined, which meant that sometimes it would take us weeks to migrate our CCF with similar issues. So that's why like for us, we ended up spending so much time every time. So then we're like, okay, maybe we change our requirements and the next tool will be the right fit. And then we end up with like, good demos. And I think we were not good buyers as well. I think the issue was also our list of requirements was not strong enough. And we might have focused on like shiny object. It was before AI, but it could have been whatever, like this dashboard is nice, we can tweak it, whatever. And then when you onboard the platform, actually like, if you create a custom dashboard, anyone else that has an account can't see that dashboard. You can't save a specific view. But you can't see that when you sandbox by yourself, right? So all those edge cases come up when you have it in production. And you're like, what? Like I can't actually like share it with someone else in my team and then push it, for example, to the audit committee. So that's things that come up when you have more than one IC in each team. But if you only have one risk analyst, then it never comes up because that person does the whole 9 yards.
Got it. Awesome. All right. You all talked about, so, all of you have bought before, assuming you have to kind of justify the cost, right, to whatever leader to approve, that purchase, no matter how much, it costs. So let's talk about cost, right? Let's talk about ROIs. How do you measure? How did you kind of propose, what the ROI would be, from the tool? What is the true cost of ownership, the TCO for build versus buy? What are the costs that most teams miss that come and bite them later on? And what's the most, kind of underappreciated or hidden cost, of building versus buying? All three of you again. Let's go, Jeff.
Sure. Yeah, I think you kind of hit it at the very end. I think one of the things that everybody has to be aware of is when you bring these demos in and you start doing these POCs for a lot of these tools, it is best case scenario, right? It is you have every module, every database, everything works perfectly, and it looks like it's going to solve the world's problems, right? So I think the biggest thing that if you haven't gone down this path before is just fully understand that some of these tools, depending on how big or how small they are, could take a year to years to get to that shiny object that they're showing you now, right? So I think kind of what I said at the beginning, I think having a small target that you're looking to achieve to show that instant feedback and show that instant return to leadership really helps, because you're not going to automate every control under the sun. You're never going to be able to implement every framework that your company has to deal with all at once. Like, it's going to have to be a slow progression with a roadmap of showing where you're going to go year after year. And it never ends, right? Because as soon as you feel like you've gotten to the point where you finally hit that shiny object, something like AI comes along, and now there's a new shiny object that you're going to be chasing down the road a little bit further. So I think for me, I'm just having that understanding that you need to start small to show the return, and that shiny object they're showing you can get there, but it's not something that you can pitch that you're going to be able to solve overnight. So if you understand that, then you know that there's going to be more cost after you get the tool stood up, because once it's stood up, that you have to refine to Ayoub's point. You have to build all the bring all the connectors. You have to connect it to all the different other tooling to make sure that you can get all the data and stuff that you need. So as long as you understand that, it makes the journey a little bit easier. But those are some of the hidden costs that come with buying a tool right off the shelf.
Got it. Pepe.
Yeah, so for us, the ROI, it's the classic story because we're a software vendor. I think we're three in that position right now. So trust sells. We need to demonstrate trust to our customers. We needed a trust center at the time, and we were able to validate some of our hypotheses around the trust center. We were able, for example, to reduce the back and forth with salespeople about like the version of a document by 80%. So being able to use a platform as a sales enablement platform suddenly puts the whole cost discussion into another perspective. Also, the way I framed it was basically, I want a certification machine. I want to get one new certification per year, and I want to do that without any new headcount. So that is a pretty easy sell when security is part of your sales motion. So on that side, like maybe it's a specific profile that we have working with software companies. On the cost, so there's some interesting issues around cost that we hadn't anticipated. The main one, and that's gonna sound silly, but just rotating API keys. So we have, I don't know, around 60 plugins into our platform involving many different teams. So every other week we have to create a ticket to say, oh, our API key needs rotation. So that was a cost, because suddenly, like, it's not like we monitor this very well. Maybe there's some improvement to be made, but it's more like I need to review the Snowflake evidence. Oh, yeah, the service account is expired. Need to create a ticket to the DBA team. The other costs were just like, I think we don't have nowhere near your scale, but we still do have some scale. We process around 1 billion queries per day, and we have, I don't know, let's say 8,000 EC2 machines running in production every day. So the GRC platform gathering AWS evidence has sometimes some troubles dealing with that massive amount of information. So that once again, like what Jeff said, like, oh, it looks great in the sandbox environment, but it's almost impossible to test it at full scale, because like any tests on 8,000 EC2s, like that would break the sandbox environment. And well, I don't want to put something in POC in my production environment. There's no chance. So that's a bit of a unsolvable mystery almost.
Awesome.
Yeah, great points all around. Like I would say, in terms of like the ROI, similar to what Pierre-Paul said, and I think Jeff talked about that as well. Is like I think about two main like avenues. I think Pierre-Paul talked about the trust center. Like anything that you can like tie in your impact to the kind of bottom line, I think makes it easier. You can't create like a direct line, but you can say, okay, like out of this amount of ARR, we've been involved in like 60%. So for that, like we use that quite a bit, but it only goes so far. At some point, it gets a bit tiring. So you can use it once or twice, but then people are like, yeah, that's fine. You answer a question, you jump on like 15 calls, like you didn't actually close anything, right? So it's finding that balance. And then on the other side is like something I both like and dislike, but compliance is often also in of itself becoming a sales enabler, because you're like, if you get PCI, you can sell to a new industry, or if you get IRAP, you can sell to Australian regulated government and some of these companies. And you can, and in our company, we directly tie it to like the Salesforce opportunities. So we could say these opportunities were currently blocked, and if we get TISAX or C5, they'll get open. So you get a specific number based on like where we're blocking in the process. But once again, it's not security related, it's more sales related, but it does help because sales, they have strong pull in most software companies. It's a higher margin business. Like any additional sale you can make, it's worth the certification cost. In terms of total cost of ownership, I think the issues are different for build and buy, but you have issues in both. I think for build, it's very clear. I think Pierre-Paul talks about it often, right? Like once you build it, you have to maintain it. Lots of edge cases come up that you didn't think about. And when things break, you need an on-call rotation. You need a ticketing system. You need to properly kind of like label what's high priority, what's not, what's breaking. And especially during audit season, can quickly get a bit crazy if things start breaking at that point. And in terms of buy, I think they also like integrations are often an issue to get to the level where like it actually works for you, even though it's a big reason why you bought the platform in the first place. And the bigger you are, the less likely you are to get the full value, just because your environment's so complex. Like you have 15 different AWS orgs, like a very complex nested system. And I think another one that is often kind of forgotten about is going through the whole stage of like doing the POCs, sandboxing with limited context, then onboarding, and then potentially not being happy in offboarding. Like all that time is like actual time. If you use a more Jenkins system, you would actually produce something. So at some point it gets, especially if you have POC with like more than 3 or 4, and you have a massive like matrix with all the different criteria, like it gets like for one person in the team at least, it's like a part-time job. So you have to account for that. You get it all right at some point, but in short term, sometimes feel like you're losing quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
I think
Pepe,
one of the things that it's a harder cost to quantify, but when you are buying something too, there is this cost of like having to sometimes change your internal processes a little bit to fit the tool, right? And those are some of the ones that like you can't, it's not really on a balance sheet, you can't put a number towards it, right? But you almost have to be willing to change how you do things so the tool operates better for you, right? And I think that is probably one of the downsides to buying something right off the shelf, is you have to be willing to be okay with that, versus like Ayoub was talking about at the very beginning, right? Like there's so many requirements that GitLab has that like building something makes a lot more sense, right? For them to change their process to fit a tool to change the entire company. Right now, making chocolate, it's a little bit different. We don't have, our processes aren't that extreme, but you do have to be willing to make some sacrifices there to make sure that the tool actually works the way you need it to.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it comes to like, what are the hard things, right, that you're not going to budge on, right? That like having to change your process to meet a tool out of the box, from a compliance perspective, seems kind of like, what are you doing here, right? Like who's calling the shots here, right? Like you as a compliance team, or like this tool, right? Yeah, kind of a sticky situation to be in. Follow-up question for Ayoub and Pepe. Both of you mentioned, Pepe, you said you wanted a certification machine. Ayoub, you also said, you wanted this tool to kind of quickly be able to handle multiple frameworks and certification. So question for you guys is like, how well is that going, for the tool that you had? I mean, is it literally like, okay, you have your CCF that you load up in there, and it's all, if there's AI capabilities, there's like auto mapping to all the different standards and frameworks. What kind of frameworks? Like maybe if a SOC 2 and an ISO, they're pretty close, right, together. But if you get into like a HITRUST or a FedRAMP or a NIST 853 type level thing, quite different, right? Quite different in terms of like the bar for requirements. So I'm curious to know how you have handled and built the multiple, like one control serving multiple kind of standards and frameworks and the tools that you guys have implemented.
Well, yeah, for us, that actually that like automated. Well, it's not automated. Somebody did it in the before, but the automated cross mapping was a huge thing, because one of the things I said when we purchased the platform was, I'm never doing a gap analysis manually again. I did it for PCI. I did it for NIST, whatever. I'm not doing that again. It's painful. And the moment I do it, 2 or 3 days later, it's not even current anymore. So having that cross mapping built in right out of gate really lifted the mental load off of my shoulders.
Would you say percentage of controls coverage across these multiple frameworks for the ones that make sense, right? I mean, like there's a lot of manual stuff that doesn't make sense for a tool to be monitoring or like grabbing evidence and showing a green check mark for. But for the ones that actually are relevant, would you say, the coverage percentage wise is pretty comprehensive for the tools that you've bought to be able to pull those signals for controls effectiveness?
So for the, I would say between 50 and 75% we're able to get from plugins, basically, integrations, APIs. There's still a lot of, so there are sometimes documentation ones, like, okay, I get the evidence automatically from Google Drive, but I still gotta review the document.
Yeah.
But AI can help with that, like built-in AI features. But even then, you kind of have to read the document. And then there's just a 25%, like the example that everybody takes, like the board meeting minutes.
Yeah.
Kind of have to be manual. And so the screenshots, I'm changing my mind on screenshots. Actually, I'm reconciled myself with screenshots because of AI, because when you upload the screenshots and then the AI just explains what's going on the screen, then it becomes metadata that you can reuse with like your MCP server or your AI to say, so what's the evidence of this? And then the AI was able from the screenshot, like the most frequent one is code snippets. Like we show auditors some code snippets for automated data deletion jobs, and this is the code. Oh, well, I got AI explaining the code, so I can create a nice document for the auditor and for my team to explain what's going on in the code. So there's an educational component to it.
Everybody heard it from Pepe here. Don't kill the screenshot just yet. Hanging on to it.
Oh my gosh, can't believe I just heard that.
I have questions for you.
Could you repeat the question real quick?
The question is the certification machine, that Pepe was talking about, and then multiple frameworks or standards. How easily is that actually with the tools that you have to be able to do that? Like test once and serve many.
So I think so on that, like tools can help, especially before GitLab. Salesforce has we had like at least 5 SOC 2 audits a year, but I think we were certified to like more than 70 or 80 frameworks. So like it was the actual machine we're working at Salesforce to see the inside of the machine, and that's where you need an extremely like strong kind of common controls framework approach. All this was before AI, so you needed manual people to do it, and also everything starts from the control instead of starting from the framework. So it's like the control gets tested, and the evidence that you have, your controls become fairly large, or you have to split them up because you end up with a control that has to satisfy with 90 requirements at once. So you end up with like a big testing sheet or walkthrough, or you can slice it to sub-controls. So at GitLab, it was not that complex. I think we have like 6 frameworks we care about, but you still kind of start at the control layer. ensure that your control is exhaustive enough to combine all of the different requirements. You have SCF, UCF, you have standards that help you with that, but we ended up still kind of rebuilding our own. But one thing I would say is, like, if you didn't work with your auditor to also be able to reuse like the same evidence and kind of like collate all of those audits together, that's a big, both you can save money just because they can just test it once for several frameworks. And also at the same time, it's also like a big time save. Because if you have 3 weeks for SOC 2 and then 3 months later you have 3 weeks for ISO and whatever, like it kind of adds up and you get into audit mode and like extra gray hair way too often. So I think it's great if you can just combine everything into like one main cycle, which means whatever you've produced, like it's fresh for everything. So you don't have to bug the same control owners twice. Even if it's automated, like, things might break in between. So while you can strike the iron while it's hot, I think it's like something that helps.
Awesome. Okay, let's move on to another set of questions. So, okay, let's talk about when a tool, you start outgrowing a tool, right? So we'll go with Jeff first, and then Ayoub. So, yeah, at what point, do you hit a roadblock and say, hey, we've outgrown the tool, right? It served us well, or maybe not. We tried, but it failed. But maybe when we're smaller, that did the job. But now we have to build one ourselves, right? At what point did you hit that roadblock? What did it look like? And is hybrid, is hybrid like the right call to be like the default end state, or is it just a transition phase? Go with you first, Jeff, and then Ayoub.
Yeah, I think it's a transition, right? Because I think there's twofold. It's you outgrowing the company, but there's also, and again, we'll leave names out of it because I know Microsoft is represented here, but there's also that challenge of the company outgrowing you as well, right? And there needs to be when you're buying something, you need to make sure that you have that partnership with the company that you're working with, so that the company wants to grow with you and they want to support your transition, your growth. And if they don't and they can't support that, then I think that's a red flag of either for the company or you need to move on to something else. And we've experienced that where there's roadmap items that we want to get accomplished in our GRC program that the tool that we have today either can't support, or there's a smaller company out there now who can move a lot faster to bring out a lot more iterations and change to the tool that kind of helps fit your roadmap a little bit better. So I think one of the big things is just making sure that when you're bringing on these tools that you know where your end state is and what you want to get to, and that you share that roadmap and that journey with that company that you're going with, because you need to be able to know that 2 years down the road that they're still going to be able to support your needs. Because and that's where you get your cost savings, right? You sign a multi-year contract, you get more cost savings, so you want to ensure that you're not just stagnant for that 2 years as you're moving down that road. So that's one of the things that we experienced, and I've kind of talked to the team to make sure that they have those conversations very clearly with the vendors up front, that just let them know where we're at now, but where we want to be in the future to ensure that they can support that. And I think, as I said at the beginning, with a lot of this automation stuff, it's not rocket science. There are new companies that pop up in the GRC space all the time. And a lot of them can move a lot faster because they have a small company. Their developers will even jump on calls with you to understand what you want and some of this stuff, where some of the larger companies, you don't get access to that. So I think having that conversation literally helps you understand if the company's going to be a right fit for you now, and if they're going to be a right fit for you down the road as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think so the way I view like kind of outgrowing tools is like, I think working with, I think it's every SaaS, but working with SaaS vendors is like a bit of a catch-22. So when the vendor is small, you're a bigger share of their overall revenue, which means they listen to you more. As you grow, even if you pay the same, the share of the overall revenue mix is lower. And also net new use cases that might be represented by way more other customers start to get ahead of the pile. So when they're small, also, maybe if you pick a vendor that you like and you kind of have that partnership going on, you also might design where the solution might go. But also, it's very rare that very, very small startup solutions work for like big enterprises, which means as you get more complex, the solution for which you were a design partner is less and less of a fit. So that's this weird setup where you end up, the company that you liked at the beginning, you end up disliking them at some point because they just have to answer to, now they have 100 customers, not just 10. And you, as a company that has like very unique needs, especially if you have to dog food and similar constraints, like you end up going to another one where you design again and you go through the same stage. And I think at some point you just like, at least that's how we felt. We were like, we've given all this money, like we can also indirectly doing free development for them because we need integrations that they don't provide out of the box. So you extend the platform by using your own time to make them better for no return. So that's where the mix is kind of weird, where like that engineering time could have spent building our own stuff. So I think that's what's difficult, is at some point you end up with that growing pain, or you're like, I could find a more innovative small vendor, but I might outgrow them as well because they'll get bigger. Or I might just build something on my own, but I have to face other pains. But at least if I'm well prepared, I'll know what the pains are, because you can just ask whatever, like a dev in your team would try to build their own library for XYZ and have to maintain it 5 years later. Like, you know about all the pains.
Yeah. I mean, it brings up a good point. Like how much of your decision, right, assessment and decision to go with one tool or another is based off of how much percentage out of the box is perfect versus how much customization, dev work is needed from the tool, the vendor tools team. And like, how do you assess, like how well that's going to be, how well the partnership with the dev team, and the customization that your organization needs from the tool, and how that's going to turn out. Like how do you even kind of assess that, right, and make a call on that?
Question for me?
Sure.
So I talked about that at the RSA talk. I think the way we thought about it at GitLab is we mapped out all of our workflows. So like very clear, okay, control testing, this input, this process, this output. And then for risk assessments, like these are kind of the data we pull in. This is how we assess. This is the levels. And then this is how it's consumed. Might be consumed by 5 different personas, and they consume it in these ways. And for us, we were not good, especially in the POC stage before. So when we built it, we actually thought about it that way. It's like, if you come to a company and you're trying to go for a demo, or like trying to go through a POC, if the core workflows that is 90% of what you care about as a GRC person, they're not like a tight couple. So I think you need a team tool fit. If you don't have a strong fit on that part, then it will never work out. Because if from the ground up, the platform is not designed for how you do work, they won't rebuild it for you ever, even if they say everything in the contract. If they don't have your specific integration and you're okay with the time lost, then that's fine, because these things are details, or like you need a different view. But if the core workflow, which is how your team spends more of this time, like you don't have a strong fit there, I think you can't come back from that. I think you'll just, even if they have great UI, like 15 different AI agents that like, do your dishes or whatever, it won't make up for the core workflow issues.
Got it. Next question. I think it's a question that doesn't really get talked about enough. All these GRC teams, compliance teams, security teams are using these fancy tools, right, to make their lives easier. There's one player, right, in the whole kind of audit, game, auditors. How do auditors feel about the data and the evidence coming out of these tools, right? I mean, GRC teams wish that auditors could be like, oh, green check. All right, good to go, right? I mean, there's a scandal going on, right, about tooling, producing green checks, and auditors kind of rubber stamping. But yeah, like for auditors, what has your experience been, right? And we'll start with Pepe and then go to Ayoub. What has your experience been of auditor acceptance of the data coming out of these tools? And at least in the first year, like, does it actually make your job easier? Does it actually make the audits more efficient? Or do you have to spend more time explaining to the auditor what's going on, with this tool, and they have to do like all the validations, from that?
Yeah, pretty much as you've described. The first year, you're not getting much ROI because the auditor has to figure out why he's or she's getting a bunch of CSVs.
Yeah.
And then you cannot go out there and just send the code snippet as well. Oh, here's a 200 lines Python script or whatever. So what I ended up having to do was to provide the necessary context to the auditor, which meant basically documenting the whole process by which a pull request gets made, and well, what are you seeing from? You're seeing like these merges from GitHub or GitLab. This is what you're seeing in the CSV. This is how the request is made. And of course, within the platform, you should be having like the indexing or the evidence gathering process, like the API calls. So you kind of have to create a document if it's not provided by your GRC platform, just explaining what's going on there. So it's basically almost documenting your platform's code in a sense. So yes, first year, you're going to get some friction with an auditor. Especially for us, it was a new person doing the testing the first year we transitioned to the platform. So that, imagine, you're an auditor and you need, you're basically getting a bunch of CSVs about EC2 tags and whatnot. Of course, they're going to get confused. So you kind of even have to create a document where you have the screenshots to see, okay, this is what it looks like in the console, like a generic screenshot, and then you're getting the extraction from the AWS API using these types of requests. So there's a lot of work upfront to explain it to your auditor, but the good thing is that you can reuse those documents for your team to train your team on what's going on in the audit.
Got it. Yes. Many people that I've talked to echoed the same thing. Like, I have to create artifacts for my auditors just to extend and just to translate, the technical jargon between what the tool is doing, what we've done with the tool, what's underneath the tool, to something that's more relatable and digestible to what they're used to seeing, such as like a screenshot. Right? Ayoub?
Yeah, I think what's tough is like automation platforms. They're natively fit for smaller teams, which means often they're working with like non-core GRC personas, which means auditors, they were like baked in to this platform. So they know how the platforms operate. And when you work at like bigger companies, we often bring our own auditors to whatever platform we use, which means we have this context gap every time where we might cycle from different platforms and we keep the same auditor. So for me, what I care about in the platform is how can I export all that data? Because if it's only like API calls and JSONs, like it looks nice, it's very GRC engineering, okay? But if it takes like 15 hoops for the auditor to understand, then I'm not doing my job, right? So I think it's like having different ways of exporting the data is fairly important. Could be CSV, could be like you could have testing sheets for the key controls where explain how we did it manually before. So then they can match the automated to how we did it manually. It could be like a Google Docs, and have that as like a historical artifact, so they understood like the historicity of how we changed our testing approach. But at the end of the day, what I'll also say is like, GRC, we work in this space 365 days per year. Auditors, they analyze environments for a couple of weeks per year. So I'm like, before any automation platforms, we just send like a bunch of CSV through email, and everyone was still employed and it still worked out. So I'm also like caring more about how we improve our internal workings and how we collaborate with our internal stakeholders for more impact. And then auditors, we're a customer, right? So there's also something where we have to make sure they understand it. But I won't like if the key reason why I will build or buy is for the auditor experience, then I should have been an auditor instead, right? I think I should care more about my internal stakeholders, and they're just an externality of a well-run program. But yeah, the better they can consume the data in like a more dynamic and like useful and continuous control monitoring format, like that's the best. But if it's not the best, like it should still work out. Like I don't see an auditor that says, okay, this is not the way I like it, I won't go forward with the audit. Like hopefully no one has seen that before.
Again, shout out to Ayoub's GRC Engineering newsletter. I think he talked exactly about that, right? Don't plan for an audit program, right? Plan for internal kind of security assurance and compliance assurance. All right, next one's coming to Jeff. This question is about, green dashboards, green checks in a dashboard. A lot of the criticism, right, of these tools are showing green dashboards that don't reflect reality. So like some people call them watermelons, right? Green on the outside, red on the inside with holes. Why is this the case? Why do you think this is such a prevalent perception? Is it merely like implementation errors, right? With GRC teams either being ignorant or malicious, right? To just say, hey, this is what the tool out of the box is showing. I'm going to run with it because that's the tool. They're the experts. They're building these things. Or is it an inherent gap, in out of the box functionality? It's like erring on the side of biasing towards showing a green check, even if all the things, haven't really been validated yet. Is there something kind of extra you have to do to make sure the evidence is complete, accurate, and defensible under audit?
For sure. And I think, there's two parts to that, right? And I think one is definitely, I think a lot of these tools err on the side of showing things are green and compliant. And an example that we're kind of working through right now is we're working on automating some of our vulnerability management controls, right? And we're taking an approach of looking at it as if you can hit a percentage of the SLA, then it's green. And because in reality, like everybody, like you're never going to remediate 100% of your vulnerabilities. So if your control is testing that they're all remediated, then you're going to have a control that fails every single time. It never passes, and eventually it's going to be like the boy who cried wolf, where like nobody cares about it anymore because we just know it's never going to pass. But the downside to that is like, if you lower your percentage and now you're looking at 85% of your vulnerabilities are patched, it's like, okay, now it's always green, right? And there's that 15 to 20% that didn't meet their SLAs, and maybe those are the 15 or 20% that you really need to look at. So I think it overemphasizes compliance because that's what a lot of these tools want to show you, that you are compliant. The green check mark is there. But I think it comes back to onus on the GRC team to really make sure you're explaining why that shows it's the way it's showing, because you're not going to just want to fail control every single time. And as it relates to the auditors, I think it's hard because you have, and I was an auditor in my previous life, so now I'm getting some PTSD having this conversation about auditors, and I apologize to all the auditors that might be on the call here today, but there's that perception of, hey, like if the auditors only want to look at a sample of 25, I will give them a sample of 25, I'll let them go on with their way, and we'll move on, versus the, hey, should I really automate this control in real time and monitor 2,000 occurrences of this control because I'm looking at a full population? Sometimes that conversation is hard to have with leadership. You're like, hey, yeah, this control failed because 1 out of 2,000 of the occurrences actually failed, where if we would have tested a sample of 25, it would have passed. So I think all of this boils back down to the GRC team and making sure they're really articulating and explaining why the dashboard is showing what it's showing, so everybody has that full context, that there is that percentage of controls that aren't being looked at, a percentage of occurrences that really needs to be explained.
Got it. I'll open it up to either Pepe or Ayoub if you want to answer that question too.
I mean, we could do a whole other webinar about the highly problematic incentives when you're a B2B software and you're facing TPRM teams. I don't know about you, but once we've sent a pen test report with a low finding that wasn't remediated, we spent the whole year getting arbitrary deadlines on fixing that one. So that's a bit the incentive problem we get with the watermelon question, is any transparency is not rewarded, because even though the low didn't matter in the grand scheme of things, we had to provide remediation plan on that. So the more transparent you are, the more you're quote unquote punished with administrative work.
Yeah. More questions. Going back to the implementation error, or like, inherent gap in out of the box functionality, right? Like the scandal that we all kind of know about in the GRC world right now kind of infers that out of the box functionality, right, is biasing towards showing green. When as like a typical compliance person is like, the burden of proof is on the control owner, whoever the GRC team, to validate and justify the green. It doesn't default to green, right? So I'm curious just to kind of, see if the tools that you guys have encountered, like out of the box, is it, which one is it? Is it like, yeah, it's green, but I know it's not green, I got to fix something to make it accurate? or you have to put in the work to do the right thing in order for it to show green or another color.
Yeah, from our perspective, of course, like when I think about greens, I think about trust centers. In terms of trust centers, like, we use the biggest, most well-known one that everyone knows about, and you had to like onboard everything, like onboard every single control domain and area, and they don't display up until you have like evidence, and like you'd say how it's operating, but anyone can challenge you on that, right, and ask for more evidence if they want to. But you want to have like the full website already like loaded with everything, because then they have to like hallucinate evidence. If you don't provide evidence, then you can't show it as well. You have to either include text or include like a supporting artifact. But yeah, it would have been great if we'd be compliant by default, but that's the plan. At some point we'll get to that, but it's not the case right now.
All right. Well, we're nearing the end of the session today. So I have a closing question for each one of you. We'll just do it round robin. Jeff, Pepe, and then Ayoub. You all made the decision to buy, right, at some point. If back then you had access to the AI technology today, and GRC engineering is a field that's rapidly growing. People are talking about the skills that are needed and that are being quickly developed, using also tools and technology to up level. Would you still buy, like back then, put yourself back then using today's kind of technology and skills and roles of GRC engineering? Would you still buy? Would you still have made the decision to buy, or would you have built instead? Jeff?
Yeah, from a Hershey perspective, if you ask me from a Hershey perspective, I don't think our company is that complex. If you ask other people at Hershey, they'd probably tell you we work at the most complex company on the face of the planet. But from a compliance perspective, I think I probably still would have chose the buy route, because our business is not that complex, right? We aren't selling software to other companies. We aren't, we're making chocolate at the end of the day, and we're making people happy. So from a compliance standpoint, we don't have all the regulations that we have to adhere to. We don't have to have 9,000 certifications, right? So for us, that question is relatively simple, because we can change some of our internal processes to make a tool right off the shelf work for all the needs that we have. But I can easily see, especially from the conversation that we've had today from the other two panelists, right? Like their companies are just slightly more complex than ours. So I fully understand why their decisions might be a little bit different than ours.
Thanks, Jeff. Pepe?
Yeah, I love that answer. It's really grounded in the business of Hershey, basically. Love that. And for us, to be perfectly candid, like I think if there was AI when we kind of did the transition, like the AI of today, 2 or 3 years ago, I think I would still be vibe coding a GRC thing with like a bunch of MCP servers going around and trying to make that work out of ChatGPT or Cloud Desktop thing. Probably like breaking next year or in 2 years. But would probably still be trying to stitch something together by this point. Accumulating tech debt and getting something like a Frankenstein monster here.
Yeah. A quick follow-up question for you, Pepe. How do you think, again, going back to my earlier question, how do you think auditors would have reacted to something like that versus like a tried and true vendor tool that's kind of proven, has their own SOC 2's ISO, right? How do you think your auditors would react to that Frankenstein monster versus a third-party tool?
Yeah, that would have been the same confusion, but with more skepticism.
For us, so technically we built our platform fairly recently, but it was before AI coding was good. Let's say before, especially like November 2025. Like looking back, like all the prep, like surveying, like data flow diagrams, all these things we'll probably do. I would still probably steer towards like the build side with the context, because 2 things. I think the cost of code is going down, but like intent is everything. So if you've mapped everything very well, you understand your tech stack, and you have actual engineer or at least someone in your team, like they know what they're looking at. So if they can check the code, like the vibes part is because you don't know what you're looking at. So I think that part would be a big differentiator going down the build route. And I think the other part is I think both cost of code is going down and cost of tech debt is going down. Because if you spend the time to then spend more tokens on fixing the debt and you know what you're doing, you can still fix the debt. So I'm like, on both ends, I think now thinking like a builder, even if you're a buyer, that's fine, but like understanding your program in depth ensures that you can make it work both as a buyer and a builder. But yeah, it's full on vibes. That's my take.
Awesome. Well, that's the end of our session. Grace is going to come in and close us out, but thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing the insights. For our viewers, I highly recommend you follow each one of them on LinkedIn. Get with them. They're happy to share their experiences too. So thank you so much, Grace.
Yeah, awesome. This was really great. The decision to buy versus build is clearly not one size fits all. And I really appreciate you all sharing your perspectives here. There was a lot of really valuable, super specific insights throughout. So thank you all so much. And to everyone who joined us today, we hope to see you at the next one.